Education in Cuba has been a highly ranked system for many years. The University of Havana was founded in 1727, and there are a number of other well-established colleges and universities. Following the 1959 revolution, the Castro administration nationalized all educational institutions, and created a system operated entirely by the government. Strong ideological content is present, with the Constitution stating that educational and cultural policy is based on Marxist ideology. Education expenditures continue to receive high priority, as Cuba spends 10% of its central budget on education, compared with 4% in the United Kingdom and just 2% in the United States, according to UNESCO. History. Cuba was colonized by Spain from the early 16th century until 1898, when the island was ceded to the United States following the Spanish-American War. The University of Havana, founded in 1728, is the oldest university in Cuba and one of the oldest in the American continent. In 1900, Cuba had a literacy rate of 36.1% to 42%, depending on the sources, one of the highest among developing countries. By the early 1900s, Cuba had a strong educational system, but it was only attended by half of the country's children. Schools were not accessible to the poorest Cubans, and this resulted in a low literacy rate for the country compared to the city. Prior to 1959, of the Cubans over the age of 15 years, 22% were found to be illiterate and 60% of the country was found to be semi-illiterate, because many rural Cubans had a third-grade education or less. After the Cuban Revolution, the new government placed the reconstruction of the education system as a top priority. A list of 5 key objectives was devised and used to frame Cuba's educational system. Elementary school became mandated and, more importantly, available for all children. Many children who lived in poverty were now able to acquire an education for free, providing them with an opportunity that eluded them prior to the revolution. Following the basic restructuring and reopening of Cuban schools, the new government focused on the huge literacy problem the country faced. By April 1959, 817 literacy centers were opened, and to further reach out to all, teens and other volunteers were sent out to the countryside to teach their fellow Cubans how to read. The literacy campaign served 2 purposes: first, to educate every single Cuban and teach them to read; then, to give those who live in the city a chance to experience rural living. In a short time, Cuba's new government made vast changes to the educational system, and by 2000, 97% of Cubans aged 15 to 24 were literate. Literacy provided poor uneducated Cubans a better standing within the country and the world. Education was vital to the new government, and the leaders believed that for Cuba to be strong, and for citizens to be active participants in society, they must be educated. Private universities were nationalized without reimbursement along with private schools in 1961. Female participation. The Cuban Revolution in 1959 brought numerous changes to the country, especially for women. Prior to the revolution, many women lived as housewives, and for those who needed to work, there were very few choices. Many women in rural areas worked in agriculture, and for women in the city, working as a maid or prostitute was the only choice. The Federation of Cuban Women was founded in August 1960 with a clear goal to involve all women in Cuban affairs. After years of being excluded, the women of Cuba began to play an active role in the government. The FMC wanted to see women involved with the social, political, economical and cultural issues Cuba faced. This required that schools and programs be built to provide multiple services to Cuban women. The literacy campaign was created to increase Cuba's literacy rate and also to initiate communication between the country and city. Students and volunteers went to rural areas to teach other countrymen to read and provide information on current Cuban politics. Rural women received schooling and job training if they chose to receive it, which allowed them to work outside of agriculture. For women working as prostitutes in the cities, the new government created programs to re-educate them once prostitution became illegal in 1961. Separate but similar programs were created for maids, offering schooling and job training along with free daycare and housing, which allowed the women full opportunity to rebuild their lives. Healthcare was provided focusing on the mental health of Cuban women that had previously been oppressed in the workplace. Skills to rebuild confidence and pride were taught because the new government believed that all women deserved dignity, even those in the service industry. The Cuban Revolution brought about drastic change for women, allowing them to become very active in their own country, which is what many in the revolution hoped for. Level of achievement. A 1998 study by UNESCO reported that Cuban students showed a high level of educational achievement. Cuban 3rd and 4th graders scored 350 points, 100 points above the regional average in tests of basic language and mathematics skills. The report indicated that the test achievement of the lower half of students in Cuba was significantly higher than the test achievement of the upper half of students in other Central and South American countries in the study group. The 1998 study by UNESCO was particularly impressive, because for the first time all of the countries in the study had agreed on the indicators and procedures in advance. Also, the study was taken during the height of an economic depression. Cuba's economic development has been severely restricted by the U.S. trade embargo. Cuba is one of the poorest countries in the region and lacks basic resources, yet still leads Latin America in primary education in terms of standardized testing. The facts of a relatively poor economy and a long-term continuous blockade on trade makes the Cubans' achievements more impressive. For the past 40 years, education has been a top priority for the Cuban government. Cuba maintains twice the amount of public spending on education as its more wealthy neighbors, at 10% of GNP. Cuba shows how important education is by keeping a student-to-teacher ratio of 12:1, which is approximately half of the Latin American average. In addition, the youth illiteracy rate in Cuba is close to zero, a figure unmatched by all other Latin American countries. Cuban schools are closely integrated with the community. Teachers are very active in the communities of the children that attend their schools, and build strong relationships with parents and families to enhance the learning process. It has been demonstrated that there is a strong commitment to the educational sector on the part of the government. Equal opportunity for a high-quality education for all students is one of the key factors that explains that the Cuban educational success is not a miracle or an accident, but the result of many years of concerted efforts and commitments by the government to its people. Primary and secondary education. School attendance is compulsory from ages 6 to 15 or 16, and all students, regardless of age or sex, wear school uniforms with the color denoting grade level. Primary education lasts for 6 years. Secondary education is divided into basic secondary education and pre-university secondary education. The curriculum in primary and secondary schools is based upon principles of hard work, self-discipline and love of country. The primary school curriculum includes dance and gardening, lessons on health and hygiene, and Cuban revolutionary history. At the end of basic secondary education, pupils can choose between pre-university education and technical and professional education. Those who complete pre-university education are awarded the bachillerato. Technical training leads to 2 levels of qualification: skilled worker and middle-level technician. Successful completion of this cycle gives access to the technological institutes. Higher education. Higher education is provided by universities, higher institutes, higher pedagogical institutes, centers of higher education and higher polytechnic institutes. Cuba has 47 universities and total university enrollment is approximately 112,000 citizens. All higher education institutions are public. The University of Havana, Cuba's oldest university, was founded in 1728. Other official universities included Universidad de Oriente and Universidad Central de las Villas. There is also the Universidad Católica de Santo Tomás de Villanueva, Universidad Masónica, and the Universidad de La Salle in Nuevo Vedado. Distance education is offered in 15 centers across the country, which provide regular afternoon and evening courses for workers. The scheme offers 5 degrees in law, history, scientific and technological information, accounting and finance and economics. There are approximately 20,000 students taking the 5 degrees offered in all the centers of the country, about 50% of whom are at the Universidad de La Habana. These studies are offered as evening or correspondence courses and generally last for 6 years. There are also guided or free courses open to all secondary school or higher education graduates. To enter university, students must pass an entry examination to show they possess the basic knowledge required. Candidates for distance education must have completed secondary school, have at least 1 year's work experience, be between 25 and 35 years of age and pass an entrance examination. The general requirements to access university college-level education in Cuba are to present proof of lower-level studies completed. For males, to show evidence of mandatory military service completed or similar accomplishment. To successfully pass higher education access examinations, which are from subjects mathematics, Spanish language and literature, and history. The Ministry of Higher Education is responsible for policy in matters of undergraduate and postgraduate education. It controls teaching, methodology, courses and programs and the allocation of student places, as well as the specialization courses offered by centers of higher education that come under the control of other ministries. All institutions have the same status. In 1979, the Cuban Ministry of Higher Education initiated a scheme of distance education. Teacher education. A 5-year course is provided for pre-primary and primary, basic school teachers at the Institutos Superiores Pedagógicos. They obtain the licenciada en educación primaria, or other types of degrees. Admission to these courses is based on the bachillerato. Higher education students are offered specialized upgrading courses in the subjects they teach as well as teacher training courses. Many teachers are professionals from the production field, where teachers are specially selected graduate students, as has mostly been the case in the last 10 years. They receive initial teacher training simultaneously with their studies. International students. Foreign students must hold a bachelor's or an equivalent degree, have a visa and follow compulsory Spanish classes. Preparatory facilities offer courses in Spanish. During the 2001 school year, Cuba allowed 905 U.S. students to visit and study. In 1999, a program was implemented to attract students to study medicine in Cuba from less privileged backgrounds in the United States, Britain and Latin American, Caribbean, and African nations. Cuba currently hosts 3,432 medical students from 23 nations studying in Havana. However, Cuba has also provided state-subsidized education to foreign nationals under specific programs, including U.S. students who are trained as doctors at the Latin American School of Medicine. The program provides for full scholarships, including accommodation, and its graduates are meant to return to the U.S. to offer low-cost healthcare. Educational cooperation. In 2006, Venezuela and Cuba began jointly sponsoring education programs in El Palomar, Bolivia. Cuba also maintains close cooperation on education with the United Kingdom and other nations in the European Union. In 2002, the Minister for Education in the Welsh Assembly government, Jane Davidson, and representatives of the universities of Swansea and Glamorgan in Wales visited Cuba to create provisions for officials in Britain and Cuba to liaise over educational projects. In the United States, the Cuban and Caribbean Studies Institute, a part of Tulane University, has developed relations with Cuban counterpart organizations for the purposes of academic collaboration and exchange, curricular development, cultural exchange and international development and dialogue.